Thanks to my Patreon supporters. Links are down below in the description if you want to help out the channel. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at a simple VFX workflow that I've adopted that will really help you guys out. Now this is a super simple tutorial. I'm going to take you guys throughout all the steps, so let's go ahead and get started. First things first, let's just go ahead and download everything to get that out of the way. Now down in the description below you'll see a link to the video I use. Here it is. So we're just going to go ahead and download that. Next, we can go to the second link for the tree model, and then you will have to create a CG Trader account, but once you have, you can just go here and hit download for the blend file. Finally, for the castle model, it's a little bit more complicated, but basically you're just going to go to the link down in the description below, and then you can download any of these. Now I'm going to be working with the 8K version, but if you need more storage or something like that, you can definitely get away with the 4K or the 2K. So once you select the one that you want to use, you just go ahead and hit download. And if you don't have an account already for Production Crate, you might need to create one. And it's a little confusing of how to get a free account. But basically you just want to select free over here. Don't worry that it says $15 down here. You can come all the way down and hit uncheck mark this donate $15 a month, and then uncheck mark this subscribe. I definitely recommend you guys check out Production Crate. I actually have an account and I use a lot of assets from them, so it's really nice. But once you have all those unchecked, you can just come down here and create your own account. Once you have your account created, you can just go ahead and download whichever file you want. Okay, so inside of Blender, the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and render out an image sequence of our movie clip. I just find that it works a little bit better inside of motion tracking and everything. So I'm just going to hit plus, go to video editing, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a movie clip. And then you just want to load in that movie clip, click it here, then add movie strip. Now in order to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and position my movie clip where I want it to be inside of Blender. So I'm just going to move this all the way over up until on the very left hand side you can see that number going up. I'm going to make it to -174. So now we have this frame range for a sequence, and I just think that's a little bit nicer starting it a little bit later in the clip. So if you want to follow along, just make sure this down here says 174. Next, all we have to do is come down here to the output section. Then we're going to specify a new location. Now I highly recommend that you make it its own folder, just because it's going to give us a lot of images, so it's always nice to keep it organized. And then once you have that, you can just hit accept down here. Then we want it to be a PNG sequence. We can just turn it to RGB for now, since there's no alpha in this video clip, and then set the compression down to 0. And once we have all that, we can just come up here and render the animation. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and make a new project, general, don't save. And then come up to plus VFX, then motion tracking. Then we can go ahead and open up our image. Once you find your folder, let's just hit A to select all the files and open the clip. Next, let's go ahead and set the scene frames and prefetch our footage just so it's loaded into our cache. And then finally, I like to go up to the render properties, go down to color management, and set the view transform to standard instead of film mode. Okay, so now that we have all that done, we're actually ready to camera track the footage. Now I'm not going to go too in depth of how I camera track this shot. However, if you're interested, I actually have a camera tracking tutorial, and that is going to be linked down below. Okay, so for this shot, I'm going to set the match to previous frame. Normalize, so that if there's any luminous changes, it will basically flatline the entire tracking process. And then in the tracking settings extra, I'm going to set the correlation to a 0.9, just so that Blender is 90% sure that the tracker is correct for it to continue tracking. Let's go ahead and place the tracker in our scene just at a random place. So I'm going to hold Control and click, and then I can hit Alt S, and that will actually reveal the search area, just so we can just zoom in. That's actually a pretty decent size. You basically want it to be as small as you can get it to see individual objects. So since we're so far away, we can get away with smaller points. However, if you're tracking a closer up shot, you would want it to extend it. Okay, so that's looking good. Let's just go ahead and delete that one. And Blender can automatically detect the features of the scene, which is really nice. So let's just click the detect features over there. And then if we pull this drop down menu here, we can set the threshold to be a 0.01. That just gives us a lot more trackers. And then the distance is basically the distance it'll calculate between each point. So if we set it lower, we should get more trackers in the scene. Okay, so this is looking good. All that we have to do now is track them. So I'm going to hold Control T, and they should start tracking forward. Okay, so now that they've reached the end of the clip, you can see a lot of them made it, which is a very nice thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to the last frame and do the same thing, but in reverse. So I'm going to go again, detect features. It should automatically keep your settings down here, which is nice. And then instead of tracking forwards, we're actually going to track backwards. And that should give us a nice range of tracking marks to use throughout our scene. So with all these selected, you just want to come down here and hit this little button, and that will basically track the markers backwards. Okay, so now I have markers going forwards and backwards. You can see that some kind of stick on areas. You always want to make sure and manually go out throughout your footage and see if any slide around. Perfect example is that we actually have a car in our scene, and so this little tracking dot is actually tracking to the car, and we don't want that. We only want markers on stationary objects, and since the car isn't stationary, we don't really want that. That'll kind of throw us into a loop. So I'm just going to select that and delete that. Same thing over here. You can see this little marker is starting to drift a little. It's not staying in one location. Also, this one is spazzing out a little bit. So if you see anything like that, just go ahead and delete those to get a better solve. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and solve our camera motion. We're just going to come over here to the Solve tab. So for our A and B keyframe, we basically need to select a place where there's a lot of parallax, basically where our marks are moving a lot independently from each other. You can notice that these down here throughout this frame range are moving pretty fast, whereas these are moving pretty slow, and so that will actually help Blender a lot when determining where the 3D camera is. And so what I'm going to do is set my A keyframe to be 130, and then my B keyframe to be around 180, we'll say. So again, 130 to 180, and that will give us a pretty nice range for Blender to actually track the camera. And then we're going to go ahead and refine all of this stuff right here, and then we can go ahead and solve the camera motion. Okay, so our solve just finished. We can see we got a solve error of 0.52. That's actually really good. That means basically half of a pixel is what it's going to deviate from. So I want to try to get that as low as possible. So what I'm going to do is come over here to the cleanup section, clean tracks, and then I'm just going to push this reprojection error up until I just get a few like this. You can see that these are areas that it's hard for Blender to track its location. So what we're going to do is go ahead and just delete those. Those are basically just our outliers that we deleted. So let's solve the camera motion again, and we should get a lower solve error. Okay, so you can see that brought our solve error down to a 0.31, which is really nice. I'm going to go ahead and do that a couple more times. So again, clean tracks, reprojection error up until you just get a few, and then delete track, and then solve the camera motion again. Okay, so I did that a couple more times, and I was able to get our solve error down to a 0.17. That is actually a really good track, so we shouldn't have any moving around on the screen or anything. So now what we need to do is actually set up our tracking scene in the 3D space. So I'm going to come down here, set up tracking scene. And now it's in our scene, but it's not really orientated to the floor. So what I can do over here is I'm just going to select 3 points over here to be basically my floor plane. So with 3 points selected, I'm going to go ahead and hit floor. And now you should see that our floor plane is actually defined up here, and it's looking like it's actually sitting on the floor of our scene. Next, we can define the origin. So I'm just going to find the origin right there. And then the x-axis, I can just select that and set x-axis just so it's nice and rotated in our scene. Finally, one thing that you can also do is select 2 points and set a scale. I'm just going to scale this up since a castle is very large. I'm just going to scale that up to, let's say, around there, so 37 for me. And now that is actually it. We can go back out to the layout section, and we have successfully camera tracked in our scene. If I scrub throughout here, you can actually see that we are sticking to the floor very nicely, so that is very good. Now Blender automatically sets up some stuff inside of the scene that I don't really like, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the background layer, and also the foreground layer. We can just have everything in our scene collection. And then up here we can go to the background view layer, and then just delete that. And since we just deleted all that stuff, Blender automatically set up a lot of this stuff that we don't really need anymore, so I'm just going to delete these 4 nodes right here. And then we can plug our movie clip into the alpha over and then convert to pre-multiply. Okay, so now let's go back out to the layout section. Now would also be a good time to save the project. Okay guys, that is the end of part 1 of this 3-part tutorial series. Hopefully you learned a little bit about camera tracking inside of Blender. In the next part of this tutorial series, we'll be working with the actual models inside of Blender and then exporting out a multipass sequence to work inside of compositing. So stay tuned and make sure to like and subscribe for those parts coming out soon. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.